Hello, I'm your everyday average Jonathan. Is anyone else getting tired of the winter yet? Normally each week I take you on a build project with me, but this particular week I'm actually going to do something that has been requested of me a few times, which is a quick show and tell of my top 5 metalworking hand tools that I use every week on my projects. My top 5 tools that I just can't do without. It's going to be quick and to the point. Let's get to the shop and let's get started. All right, quick note, I will be placing the Amazon links for each of these items in the video description. In no real particular order, what I tend to do is put the items that I use the least, those are nail guns down there on the bottom, and then sort of as I go up, you'll get to the more of the items that I pull from every single day. There's a mixture of corded and cordless tools there. Everything from Ryobi to Rigid to knockoff brands to Harbor Freight to DeWalt, and this is what I pull from. All right, let's jump right on in. The top 5 metalworking power tools, I call them hand tools, that I cannot live without. So when looking at this and doing a quick inventory through, I probably use about 10 hand tool type things in any given week and rotate. But the 5 that I can't live without for the projects that I make are these 5 right here. And they're laid out in the order of their importance to me. First one is one that I'm actually kind of surprised to talk about, and that is, this is a knife sharpener. But the truth of the matter is, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, is that I use this on everything. I'm not very good at hand sharpening things. I don't know why, because I've really paid attention and tried very hard to be better at hand sharpening blades, but I tend to get them tool sharp, but not really sharp. This tool comes with 3 different sanding belts, and it's just a phenomenal tool. It really does the job. You don't have to use the angles that it comes with and suggests. I can look at this and eyeball the angle that I want. It tends to get my weapons, my items sharp enough to cut paper cleanly, whereas I by hand am not good enough to get them to cut it cleanly. The brand is Work Sharp, and I'm sure you can, and I think I bought it on Amazon. It's really, really cheap. The 3 levels of belts it comes with are one is for profiling, removing material, the other is for honing, and then this final one is for the final, maybe almost stropping, if you will. Great tool, I use it on all of my blades, and it gets them much sharper than I can get them. Those folks who are professional knife makers and really, really good at the craft, they would laugh at this. They don't need it. I need it. Also, I'm impatient, and I need it for that reason. Okay, second tool that I can't live without for metalworking is one of the 2 what I would call expensive tools that I have purchased, that I went out and said I want to get what I can afford, that I would call the best. Historically, I have been a Ryobi tool guy or a Rigid tool guy, and at some point I will do a comparison between Ryobi and Rigid tool. For the DIY person, for the at-home builder, they're great options for the most part. But when it came to impact drivers, I kept burning through, well, I'm just gonna say it, I was burning through my Rigids all over the place. My Ryobis have never really failed me, interestingly. So Hilti is the brand that I decided to go to, and they make, kids, gross. Beat it. Ugh. All right, where were we? I decided to go with one of the more expensive brands, and that is Hilti. Really liked this tool, and I put it through its paces, and it's great. Okay, this is an impact driver. Long ago, I stopped using drills almost entirely, not quite entirely, especially for woodwork I might use a drill. This is an impact driver, it's a ratcheted impact driver, so you don't feel it bite into the metal the same way a drill would twist your arm or twist your hand and sometimes actually injure you. This doesn't have that effect, but it just does such a good job. It is interesting that I paid a lot for this, and it just so happens that it's really served me very, very well. And I will say one other thing, it's a cordless, as you can see, and this battery, I have 2 of them, this battery lasts forever. It lasts 4 to 5 times as long as Rigid or Ryobi, easily. So, great tool, I use it, I hate to say it because I'm a cheapskate, I'm a budget guy, but this was money well spent, and I would do it again. All right, third tool that I use all the time on my metal projects, and this is one of several DeWalts that I use. I'm a big fan now of DeWalt, having come from first Ryobi, then upgraded to Rigid, and now I'm sort of leaning towards DeWalt. They're not super expensive, but as a metalworker, an electric die grinder does a ton of the smaller, finer work in the grinding, more detail. It's way more powerful than a Dremel. It's also a lot more clumsy than a Dremel is, so it's not that fine of detail, but it removes, I have a sanding wheel on it right now, so it's good for polishing, but it's what I use when I need to get inside small areas, especially with welding in the way that I weld. I'm not a good welder, So the welds that I use when they're inside of a crevice or in a tight corner, and I need to grind them, this is what I use. A lot of people use the air compressor die grinders. I have a pretty large air compressor that I never use. Why? I have electric die grinder, which is every bit as good. At some point, maybe I'll use the air compressor, but for right now, this DeWalt die grinder is phenomenal, and it's not very expensive. All right, fourth tool. This is a corded portable bandsaw. The guy that does my electrical work showed me this. He had a cordless one that he used to cut conduit pipe with. He showed me this, and then I started using it on large chunks of metal. Here's the I cannot live without this. As a blacksmith, I cannot live without this. Thank you to Danielle who gave me, this is a Milwaukee. I had a Bauer, which is a Harbor Freight brand. It worked great. My friend Danielle came by recently and said, hey, you use this stuff way more than I do. Why don't you try my Milwaukee? We'll just swip it out. So thank you so much for that. You'll notice that there's a little bit of pink on there, Danielle. Either way, cannot live without this. Both of these tools, I can live without that. Cannot live without this portable bandsaw. It cuts curves, not tight curves, but it does cut some curves. Here's the best thing. Unlike everything else that I have that cuts metal, this moves slowly enough and powerfully enough, there's no sparks. I do wear eye protection, but it doesn't throw up any material during cuts, and it will cut through some extremely thick metal like that. It's phenomenal. One other thing I wanted to point out, most of the tools that I am showing you right now, they're corded. I do have quite a few cordless tools, and they're fine, but what I have found out is I just need that power. The power that comes from corded tools currently just trumps the cordless stuff that I have had. There may be a few cordless tools that now the batteries are strong enough that they're close to it, but I just don't want any questions. I don't want any questions. And the other thing is, when batteries run out, you have to have a backup. I often burn through batteries during a project, so I don't want to have several batteries on file. And more importantly, batteries over time go bad. Corded items can last a very long time. If you are a creator with using metal, I cannot suggest using this more strongly. It's changed the game for me completely. I only started using this probably 2 years ago. Totally changed the game for me. All right, last tool, and this is a DeWalt corded angle grinder. It's got a wire wheel on it right now, but I use this tool probably in every single project that I do with metal. There's a wire wheel on this now. I use it with cutoff wheels. Interestingly, if you saw my last video, which was a Japanese kiridashi, which I tried to cut into a rasp, this bandsaw could not cut into this rasp. My drill press, I tried 5 or 6 different drill bits, some expensive drill bits, and it couldn't penetrate that rasp. I put a cutoff wheel on this, cut into it just fine. I use this for grinding, I use this for cutting, I use it for the wire wheel, for polishing, if you will, for abrading. I use it for everything. Here's a pro tip from a non-pro. I'm laughing because this is so hillbilly, it cracks me up. My shop is very, very cold. I have an itty bitty little space heater in the shop for my hands, but when my hands get really, really cold, this item, after using it for a while, heats up. I think this is aluminum. I put my hands on it while I'm using it sometimes, and it warms my hands. So it's also a hand warmer. Okay, I have 3 honorable mentions. I'll go through them really quickly. Also, a DeWalt. As I mentioned, I'm slowly transitioning my tool set to DeWalt. This is a jigsaw. When I have sheet metal for armor and I need to cut certain patterns, I do go to this, not all the time, but most of the time. As a side note, as an armor maker, the gauge of metal that I use almost always is going to be at a minimum 14 gauge. Why? Historically, most armor was going to be 16 and 18 and maybe even thinner than that. For 14 gauge and 12 gauge and even down to 11 gauge, this does just fine, cutting great shape. So it's really good when I'm making armor and I'm using sheet metal. Also honorable mention, this is a Bauer, this is a Harbor Freight tool. These are sheet metal shears. So when I'm cutting something out of something that's right around 16 gauge, maybe 14 gauge, and it doesn't have a lot of tight patterns, this cuts really fast. Cuts right through the sheet metal really, really fast. That said, this is my second one. The first one I bought was a cheap knockoff off of Amazon, and I broke it pretty quickly. It snapped. This one I've only used a few times. Like I said, Harbor Freight brand. It's been pretty good for me, and it goes right through sheet metal really quickly. Last one for me is this rigid saw. This is a cordless saw. What's cool about this is that I have put a metal cutting blade on this, and this is cordless, And I don't use that this much, but back when I used to go to this one particular salvage yard a lot and I would buy stock metal for them, the guy there had one, I think he actually had a rigid, and he would cut through some really thick bars of metal using this metal saw blade and a portable saw like this, just because it just chewed right through it. I do have a metal chop saw, which is what I use to cut through large thick stock, but if I needed something portable, this metal tooth saw blade on there, this goes right through metal. It's surprisingly good. One big caveat, this throws up material, not sparks, it throws up chunks, burrs, pieces of metal right and left. So absolutely use really good eye protection, not just goggles, something more full face with this sucker. That's it from my shop. I look forward to sharing with you my next build project that's coming quite soon. Until then, God bless, be well.